Nialu, a tall, thin, poor farmer with feet covered in dust, sat at the corner of the village, looking up at the sky. There was something in his eyes, as if he could see shadows of a coming disaster before time itself. Nialu wasn't an ordinary man. People called him crazy. Some said he was a beggar. Others thought he was just an eccentric villager. But the elders always referred to him as the one who has seen, the one who sees hidden truths in dreams. At that moment, a shiny car kicked up dust as it appeared on the narrow village road. Black windows, gleaming hood, and wheels that seemed to tell a story of power. Out stepped Ezekiel Gomba, a young billionaire whose outfit alone could buy months' worth of groceries for Nialu's whole family. He was headed to the business meeting that was being talked about around the world, a new luxury resort on hundreds of acres of coastal land, millions in investment, international partners, and just one signature away from reality. Nialu, older than Ezekiel's own father, rushed into the road and raised his hand to stop the car. There was no sweat on his face, but a strange seriousness. "Don't go, son," he said with a trembling voice. "There's not just silence buried beneath the land. There are screams. It's not just gold there. There are curses, too. I saw a dream, a burning bird flying through the sky, and the ground shaking like an earthquake." Ezekiel paused, smiled. "Old man, I'm going to write destiny. Dreaming is your job. Making it real is mine." And with that, he got back in the car and left. As Ezekiel Gomba's car crossed the village boundary, Nialu's face began to disappear in the background, but his voice kept echoing in Ezekiel's mind. He shook his head repeatedly, turned up the volume of the car's sound system, and kept convincing himself that a mad old villager's rambling couldn't possibly affect the biggest business decision of his life. The car moved swiftly on the wide roads of the city, and Ezekiel's mind was tangled in calculations. Resort location, arrival of international partners, government promises. He was completely sure that the land, which had been empty for years, was now as valuable as gold, and he was the only one who could bring it to life. But as he approached the coastal region, the weather began to change. Clouds gathered in the sky, and along with the humidity in the air, there was a strange heaviness. He rolled down the window slightly, and an unpleasant odor entered with the breeze, like old rotten wood or stagnant river water. The driver exchanged glances with him, but both chose to remain silent. When they reached the site, the team was already there. Bulldozers, helmeted laborers, engineers with blueprints, everyone busy in their roles. Ezekiel stepped out of the car and headed straight to the site office. There, the project manager, Marcus Endeli, welcomed him, but beneath his smile was a hidden worry. "Sir, we're finding some strange things," he whispered. "Every time we dig, we find old bone fragments, stone idols, and symbols of some religious rituals." Ezekiel frowned. "These are just old stories, Marcus. There's nothing in our documents. The Department of Culture has already granted us NOC. We just need to move forward." Marcus went quiet, but concern in his eyes only grew. That same evening, one of the workers named Bola ran out of his tent screaming. He had his hands on his ears as if he was hearing something the others couldn't. He claimed he heard the sound of a crying child from beneath the earth and the wailing of a woman coming from underground. Everyone thought he had gone mad, but that night, 4 workers left the camp and never returned. Over the next 3 days, 3 cranes broke down. One had a burnt wire. The second's brakes failed, and the third sank into the ground. Ezekiel grew increasingly angry, but the technical team had no clear answers. Days passed, and the problems only grew. Local community protests also began. They shouted that this land was sacred, that there were ancestral graves here, and that Ezekiel was awakening a curse. One day, when Ezekiel personally visited the site, he saw the workers had stopped working. All eyes were fixed on a pit that had just been dug. From it emerged a strange statue, made of black stone, with eyes red as blood, and a mouth wide open as if it were screaming. Ezekiel thought it was a joke and said, "Send it to a museum. We're here for business, not beliefs." But that very night, Ezekiel started having strange dreams. He found himself in a burning forest, where birds were flying upside down, and a tall old man with a masked face was threatening him. "You have awakened the pain of the land. Now the screams will awaken you." Ezekiel woke up drenched in sweat. When he stepped outside, the whole site was eerily silent. The workers had gone on strike. They claimed they had seen a shadow roaming the site at night, its eyes burning, visiting every place that had been dug. Ezekiel's friends and investors, from London, Dubai, and New York, began to back out. One of them said clearly, "Ezekiel, this isn't just some local legend. This is something more. We need to pull our investments out." Still, Ezekiel refused to give up. He brought in environmental experts, religious scholars, and applied for new permits from the government. But every door closed on him. His reputation also began to suffer. News channels started reporting, and viral social media videos showed protesters cursing him. Eventually, his own family, his wife, sister, even his mother, told him, "This wealth will drown you. Come back before everything you've built is taken from you." And then, everything changed. A sudden storm struck the site, uprooting trees, flipping machines, and casting darkness over the whole area. That day, when Ezekiel visited and saw that same statue again, now fully intact, with something like blood flowing from its face, something inside him shattered. He remembered Nialu's words, "Don't go, son," and realized he may have truly awakened something that had been sleeping, but never silent. In that moment, Ezekiel decided it was time to turn back. But was it too late? Had he crossed a line he could never return from? Ezekiel Gamba's heart pounded, as if his own body no longer trusted his thoughts. The statue's bloody face and the eerie silence after the storm filled him with a fear he had never felt in his life. He kept telling himself, "It's all just coincidence." But his heart knew something had gone terribly wrong. After that day, workers refused to return to the site. Marcus, who had been the backbone of the project, resigned. Investors began canceling their deals one after another. Only a few quiet faces remained on Ezekiel's team, either too afraid to leave or holding on to a last bit of hope. Ezekiel tried to regain control. He invited religious leaders from the city, took them to the site, and asked if the place was truly haunted or cursed. An old spiritual leader, Imam Yuma, touched the ground and said, "This place was asleep. You woke it. You turned silence into screams." Meanwhile, media pressure kept rising. News anchors called Ezekiel a man blinded by wealth. Reporters aired interviews with local villagers. One old woman, whose daughter had to relocate because of the project, cried on camera and cursed Ezekiel. "The land you bulldozed was the land of my dreams. You buried my past. Now your present will bury you." Hashtags against Ezekiel trended on social media. International environmental groups launched campaigns and legal action. One day he received a letter, a court order to halt the project immediately, and a $50 million lawsuit. Once a decision maker, Ezekiel was now a defendant in court. His life became a tangled knot. His wife left him and returned to her parents' home with their children. His mother cut off contact. Friends either stopped answering calls or politely said, "It's too risky to associate with you right now." That isolation finally broke his stubbornness. He, who once believed the world was at his feet, now felt like a burden on his own land. One night, he headed back to Nialu's village. The same road, the same silent hills. But this time, his hands held no business files, only a heavy sack of regrets. He sat silently outside Nialu's hut until the old man came out on his own. Nialu looked into Ezekiel's eyes, asked nothing, and quietly pulled out a small mat. "Sit," he said, "and listen." Nialo told him stories from ancient times. He said that the land was once a forest where the elders of the tribe would offer their prayers, heal the sick, and teach children to love the earth. When the colonial era came, the first conflict took place there. The white men buried explosives in the ground, killed animals, and forced people to migrate. At that time, the tribe's shaman had cursed that whoever touched this land without permission would lose everything. You didn't just disturb the soil, you trampled upon memory, Nyalo said. Ezekiel listened in silence, then softly asked, "What can be done now? How do I atone for my sin?" Nyalo said that complete atonement might not be possible, but accepting the truth is the first step. He advised that Ezekiel come forward publicly to admit his mistake, cancel the project entirely, and restore the land to its original state. Though this suggestion was hard for Ezekiel to swallow, he knew there was no other way left. The next day, he called a press conference. Reporters came from all over the world, and in front of everyone, Ezekiel said in a trembling voice, "In my greed for wealth, power, and pride, I ignored everything that truly mattered. I ask forgiveness from the local people, from this land, and from nature itself. I am ending this project and devoting a large part of my wealth to the restoration and welfare of this region." Everyone was shocked by this announcement. Some called it a performance. Others saw it as a late but important step. Nyalo, who sat quietly in a corner, simply smiled and looked up at the sky, whispering. He finally listened. Over the following months, Ezekiel worked to reverse the project. He called environmental experts, held prayers with shamans and tribal elders, and began the effort to repopulate the land with trees, birds, and people. His company's stock was plummeting in the market, but a deep peace was settling into his heart, a peace he hadn't felt even after earning his first $1 billion. Ezekiel Mobutu's life had become a whirlpool. Once considered the brightest star among Gold Coast tycoons, he was now a symbol of disgrace, isolation, and continual collapse. Not only were legal actions underway against his project, but the media had begun portraying him as a national criminal. His face appeared in every newspaper, TV channel, and social platform as a symbol of disgrace. His business empire began to fall piece by piece, like sandcastles crumbling in a desert. Banks froze his loans, international partners withdrew, and his own team quietly left the offices one by one, no matter how much he tried to salvage things. Time and fate were now against him. His wife, Nerea, once considered his pillar of strength, left him a note and walked away. In your chase for wealth, you lost land, honor, and humanity. I can no longer live in the prison of your silence. His mother stopped answering his calls, and his own children refused to acknowledge him at school. One day, as he sat alone in his office, rain began to pour heavily, as if even the sky wept for him. Suddenly, an old voice echoed in his mind. Nyalo's, who had once warned him, "You'll feel the breath of this land as a burden, but when it screams, your palaces will tremble." He had made his decision. He would run no longer. The next morning, without servants or security, with a hunched back, he set out for Nyalo's village. On the way, people cast mocking glances at him. Some cursed him. Others turned away as if he were a cursed shadow. When he reached Nyalo, the rain had stopped, but the ground was still muddy and foul with old smells. Nyalo, who once seemed frail and weak, now appeared like a mountain before him. Ezekiel knelt and said, "Baba, forgive me. I have lost everything." Nyalo looked at him silently, then opened an old wooden box containing the tribe's sacred soil. He placed the soil in Ezekiel's hand and said, "The land you trampled upon will now become your shroud, unless you embrace it." That night, Ezekiel stayed in the village. He sat with the elders, listened to their stories, and for the first time, he realized that land is not something to be bought or sold. It is something to be felt. The next day, Ezekiel called a press conference. Before cameras from around the world, he wept and asked for forgiveness. He announced he was dedicating all his assets to the land's restoration and said, "I am no longer the owner of a company, just a son of this land." The land on which he once dreamed of building a resort was now being repopulated with trees, birds, and the laughter of children. He began a rehabilitation project with environmentalists, local activists, and tribal elders. The river that had dried up began to flow again. Birds that had migrated began to return, and the old woman who had spoken most fiercely against him once brought him hot corn and said, "You admitted your mistake, now you are our son." Some media outlets were stunned by this transformation. A few remained skeptical, but most appreciated that a powerful man had finally bowed before the truth. Ezekiel was no longer a shining face on magazine covers, but in the village children's stories, his name began to appear. The man who taught the earth to breathe again. His eyes now carried peace, his heart carried gentleness, and his face carried that light seen only at dawn. One day, as he sat beneath the trees with Nyalo, telling stories to children, Nyalo whispered in his ear, "You listen to the voice of the earth, so now it will keep you alive." Ezekiel looked toward the sky, where the sun peeked through the clouds, like a promise of a new day. He knew that not everything could be regained, but he had learned that bowing before truth is greater than any victory. Ezekiel Mobutu's story was no longer a tale of a fallen capitalist, but had become a metaphor for a spiritual journey. In his intoxication with wealth, fame, and power, he had not only desecrated sacred land, but also crushed the dreams, culture, and balance of nature held by the local people. But time is unforgiving. What he believed was strength turned out to be his greatest weakness. His downfall began the moment he ignored the words of a sincere, simple man like Nielo, when he thought that progress was only found in concrete, steel, and money, and that land, trees, water, and prayers were mere stories. But stories are not just part of dreams. They often serve as mirrors, showing us our true selves. And that is the beauty of stories. What Ezekiel lost may never return, but what he learned can't be taught in any university in the world. He learned that strength, when softened by humility, becomes construction, but when mixed with arrogance, brings destruction. He also learned that the earth which feeds us can also grant us peace, if we learn to listen to its breath. The village, once the graveyard of his dreams, had now become a sanctuary for his remorse. Children gathered around him, elders prayed with him, and birds seemed to understand his silences. People began to learn not from his words, but from his actions. That is true change, when we reform not through words, but behavior. This story isn't just about one man's mistake and redemption. It's a mirror for all of us in one way or another. We've all become Ezekiel, hurting the earth, ignoring relationships, or silencing uncomfortable truths. But have we ever listened to the voice of the Nihilo within us? Have we ever paid attention to the words of the poor, those who may be financially weak, but spiritually more awakened than us? Have we ever questioned whether progress only means tall buildings, luxury cars, and fat bank accounts? True progress happens when a person accepts their mistake, owns their remorse, and considers themselves equal to the soil. That's when they become human and reach the level of humanity. Ezekiel became zero and rebuilt life into one. He turned his mistake into his strength. He proved that though truth arrives late, it lights lamps even in the chest of darkness. This story also teaches us that some truths are not written in files, but in the soil, the wind, the water, and the hearts of people. Someone like Nyalo may be around you too, a farmer, a teacher, an old grandmother, or a silent laborer, offering you a profound lesson in a simple sentence. But are we ready to listen? Or do we also want to become like Ezekiel, learning too late after losing everything? Now is the time to evaluate our lives, review our decisions, and ask, is the progress we chase actually a path to downfall? Is the silence we ignore today going to scream back at us tomorrow? If this story touched your heart, share it with others. Maybe someone else's heart will change too. Maybe another Ezekiel will begin to listen to a Nialo, Let us know in the comments below. What did this story teach you? Have you ever seen a moment in life where a small, quiet person revealed the truth to someone powerful? We want to hear your story. Your experience might become a guiding light for someone else. If you want to hear more stories that build bridges between our truth, nature, and humanity, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel, The Story Mark. Here we bring real stories from the heart of Africa that shake the world's conscience. From village trees to city courtrooms, every story holds a lesson if only you're ready to listen. Right now, click the bell icon below this video, so that you're notified of every new story. And if you want to become part of this channel's mission to spread truth, amplify hidden voices, and bring ancestral wisdom to the world, join us. Share this video, invite your family, friends, and colleagues to be part of the Story Mark. In the end, just remember this: stories are not just to be heard, they are meant to be lived. If today's story made you stop, think, and change, then we've achieved our purpose. Remember, people like Nyalo speak little, but what they say can change generations.